I had already made myself clear, though not with a quote meant for a press release or a headline. What I offered was something far more fragile and far more final: a body, for the first time in its long, violent career, submitting evidence against the myth it had built. Marc Márquez did not roll into Le Mans as a slow rider. He arrived as a reigning champion whose own right arm had begun lying to him at 200 kilometers per hour, and the lie was unraveling in real time. The foot fracture was the public excuse, the one that ruled him out of the weekend. But the shoulder revelation, that came later, and it came like a demolition crew arriving to tear down the excuse machine for good. Damaged screw, pinching the radial nerve after the Jerez crash, finally explained the inconsistency that had baffled everyone. The strange mistakes, the half-second gaps, the moments where the old king would still summon one perfect lap out of the chaos, only to then look like a man possessed by a machine he no longer fully commanded. He wasn't hiding weakness from Ducati. That was never the secret. He was hiding the crime scene from the microphone. Not the points lost, not the crash at Le Mans, not the physical evidence of a foot broken. He was hiding the wound that matters most. Marc Márquez, the same animal who turned the broken Honda years into theater, the same man who dragged Ducati to a 2025 title with 11 Grand Prix wins and 14 sprint wins, and a season that made old injuries seem like background noise, had finally met a problem he could not bully into submission with willpower alone. He said the arm was not doing what he wanted it to do. That sentence should have terrified Ducati more than any Aprilia lap time, because Marc's entire career was built on the opposite equation. The brain orders, the body obeys, the bike bends. This time the nerve answered first. Le Mans did not create the crisis. Le Mans simply presented the bill. Thailand had already whispered the warning. A sprint win taken away in controversy, a Grand Prix spoiled by a bizarre rear-wheel failure, and still the paddock could pretend the champion was just warming up, that the early season rust was merely ceremonial. Brazil kept the lie alive because he won the sprint and finished fourth at a right-handed circuit that was always going to attack a recovering right shoulder. Humans love calling survival evidence of health. MotoGP does the same thing with lap charts. The man was bleeding condition, and the results sheet kept dressing it as adaptation. Then Austin removed the makeup. At a circuit he once owned like private property, a place where his name was practically engraved into the asphalt, Marc never looked like a winner. That was not normal. That was not simply the GP26 behaving badly. That was a champion standing in one of his old kingdoms and finding the gates locked from the inside. Then Jerez looked like a reset because he won the sprint in madness, crashed on slicks in rain, switched through the pit lane with the kind of instinct that makes regulations suddenly seem very busy, and still made the race feel like his stage. But Sunday turned the knife. He crashed out of second at turn 11. The title gap went to 44 points. The shoulder problem revealed itself properly only after that hit. The body did not just lose time. It started editing his command in real time. That is why the Le Mans Q1 lap matters so much. He was confused. He said he did not understand how he was riding. Then he broke the lap record. That is Marc Márquez in one brutal frame, the body failing, the mind still armed, the talent still able to produce a lap nobody else could match even while the wiring was compromised. But that lap was not proof he was fine. It was proof of something colder. Even wounded, he could still swing once. The problem is that championships are not won by one swing, they are won by repetition. Marc could still summon violence, he could not guarantee obedience. The sprint high side finished the confession. 7th place front-end struggle, half a second off race pace before that miracle lap made everyone stupid enough to hope again. Then the bike spat him. Foot fracture, surgery brought forward, the French Grand Prix gone, the Catalan Grand Prix gone, and Mugello waiting with its own cruel little calendar knife. Suddenly the reigning world champion was not chasing Bezzecchi. He was chasing basic control over the limb that had made his riding possible. 71 points down after France is not just a gap. It is a public verdict written in numbers the paddock cannot massage. And here is the reversal nobody wants to touch. Aprilia did not just beat Marc Márquez. Aprilia benefited from the first season where Marc's body could no longer cover Ducati's uncertainty every single Sunday. Bezzecchi can have a bad weekend and still finish second. Jorge Martin can turn Le Mans into proof that he is a title threat. AI Augura can stand there as the quiet evidence that Aprilia's ceiling is no longer factory only. Meanwhile, Ducati needs Marc healthy just to know whether the GP26 is actually good or merely survivable in the hands of a superhuman. That is not a technical question. That is dependency with red paint on it. Pecco Bagnaia has pole positions, sprint podiums, and still sits 85 points down after crashing from second in France. Alex Marquez won Jerez and vanished around it. Dijan Antonio is Ducati's best rider in the standings and still sits 43 points behind Bezzecchi. Ducati has names, Ducati has hardware, Ducati has riders with resumes thick enough to choke a press room. What it does not have is the one thing Marc gave them last year, weekly certainty. And now the man who supplied it is lying on the other side of surgery because his own arm stopped signing the contract. So the first act is not Marc is injured. That is kindergarten with timing sheets. The first act is this: Marc Márquez's greatest weapon was never speed, it was demand. He demanded more from tires than they wanted to give, more from Honda than Honda deserved, more from Ducati than Ducati could explain, more from his body than any human body should tolerate. In 2026, the body finally answered back. The question is not whether Marc can return. The question is how many wars are left inside the man who made pain his mechanic. The mistake was not letting Marc race wounded. That diagnosis is too easy, too clean, too polite for a paddock that survives by laundering bad decisions through phrases like rider choice and medical clearance. The mechanism was older than Le Mans. Ducati entered 2026 with a machine it still did not fully understand, a champion it still needed to decode it, and a rider whose body was already negotiating with pain before the season even had the decency to begin. Then they let the one man capable of masking the GP26's instability become the same man responsible for diagnosing it while his arm was betraying him. That is the structure. Marc was not simply competing against Bezzecchi, Martin, Aprilia, Daikin, Antonio, Pecco, Alex, or the points table. He was competing against feedback corruption. Every lap he rode with that damaged shoulder created a question Ducati could not cleanly answer. Was the GP26 unstable because the bike was wrong? Was Marc inconsistent because the nerve was pinched? Was the front end feel genuinely broken, or was the rider unable to command the arm with the precision that made him Marc Márquez? That is not a racing problem. That is a development nightmare wearing red. Ducati's crime was letting uncertainty multiply. After Jerez, they knew the Spanish Grand Prix crash had left him with an odd feeling in the arm. They knew surgery was planned after Barcelona. They knew the title gap had already become savage. They knew Le Mans and Barcelona were not recovery rounds. They were risk rounds. Still, Marc continued into France because Marc always tries to convince himself. That is the sentence Ducati should have feared. The man who returned from a broken arm in 2020 after surgery and tried to ride again days later is not the rider you politely allow to self-regulate. Riders like Marc do not need encouragement. They need a locked door. But Ducati had a selfish reason to leave that door open. Marc was still their cleanest measurement tool. Pecco Bagnaia could put the bike on pole at Le Mans and still crash from second in the Grand Prix. Alex Marquez could dominate Jerez and then go anonymous on either side of it. Daikin Antonio could be fast across Brazil, Austin, and Jerez, only to finish fourth in France 2 seconds off the podium. The GP26 had pace. The GP26 had flashes. The GP26 did not have rhythm. Marc was the only rider Ducati could trust to expose whether the bike had a title inside it or just a collection of beautiful lies. That is why this gets ugly. Ducati did not need Marc merely to win races. They needed him to tell them whether 2026 was worth saving. The constructor's title was still alive, 34 points down, and that matters more to the brand than any rider's fairy tale. But the rider's title was bleeding out fast. Daikin Antonio was already 43 points behind Bezzecchi. Marc was 71 down, Alex was 73 down, Pecco was 85 down. That is not a title fight. That is a manufacturer watching its riders form a queue at the edge of irrelevance, while Aprilia builds a podium monopoly one weekend at a time. Aprilia understood the mechanism because Aprilia had no need to hide from it. Bezzecchi's bad weekend is a Sunday second place. Martin's Le Mans performance becomes a title threat announcement. Augura becomes proof that the Aprilia is not just a factory weapon, but a platform wide enough to threaten a podium lockout. That is the difference. Ducati's strength depends on extracting miracles from damaged men and inconsistent packages. Aprilia's strength is starting to look transferable. One factory is asking riders to rescue the bike, the other is handing riders a weapon and watching them multiply the threat. The official story will say Marc's surgery explains the struggle. It does, but it also exposes the lie underneath the struggle. If Marc was compromised, then Ducati never had clean evidence that the GP26 was a championship machine in his hands. If Marc was still fast enough to break a Q1 lap record while compromised, then Ducati cannot blame the rider for lacking ceiling. If Marc could crash from 7th because his arm did not do what he wanted, then every previous mistake becomes harder to classify. Human error, physical fault, bike instability, pressure, all of it blends into one filthy soup, and Ducati cooked it by refusing to remove the ingredient that was poisoning the data. And the beneficiary is Bezzecchi, not because Marc fell, not because pain is some cheap scoreboard drama, but because every week Marc spends outside full control gives Aprilia more clean air in the championship, more proof in the constructors' fight, more leverage in the 2027 market, and more authority over the story Ducati used to own. Bezzecchi does not need to be perfect anymore. He only needs to be present, scoring and sitting on an Aprilia that makes Ducati's red empire look like it is still waiting for a software update from 2025. Marc's body broke the myth, but Ducati's need exposed the machinery. They let the rider who could still produce miracles become the rider whose pain made every miracle unreadable. They did not just lose points, they lost clarity, and once a factory loses clarity, even its fastest lap becomes evidence against it. The 2026 title is no longer waiting for Marc Márquez. That is the verdict, not because he is finished, not because the talent has gone, not because the killer forgot where the throttle lives. The title stopped waiting because the calendar has no sympathy. Aprilia has no reason to slow down, and Ducati's entire season now depends on a repaired body proving whether their motorcycle is a weapon or a fraud with good qualifying clothes. 71 points down after France. That number is not a gap. It is a locked room. Bezzecchi walks into Barcelona with 11 points over Martin, 43 over Di Giannantonio, 71 over Marc, 73 over Alex, and 85 over Pecco. Ducati has 4 names inside the top 5 and none of them holding the knife. Their best rider in the standings is Di Giannantonio, not the factory champion, not the reigning world champion, not the man on pole in France, not the Jerez winner. That is not depth. That is a factory empire spreading failure across multiple garages and calling the map competitive. If Bezzecchi wins both races in Barcelona, Marc can return starring at a possible 108-point hole. Human beings will call that mathematically possible because humans also invented comment sections, tax forms, and optimism as a coping disorder. A title can exist on paper while being dead in the paddock. This is that line. Marc may still be a combatant. He may still return and ruin weekends. He may still break lap records just to remind everyone the monster was not deleted, only wounded. But championship wars are not won by reminders, they are won by accumulation. Aprilia is accumulating, Marc is recovering, that is where the real power has moved. Aprilia no longer needs a miracle weekend to scare Ducati. Ducati needs a miracle diagnosis to understand itself. Bezzecchi's baseline is now so high that second place counts as damage limitation. Martin's run has put him inside the title conversation, not as a noisy side threat, but as the teammate with enough pace to turn Aprilia's internal war into Ducati's external nightmare. Augura is the real insult, because when a satellite Aprilia can help prove podium lockout capacity, the Red Factory can no longer pretend this is just one rider catching fire. This is a platform. Platforms win eras. Flashes win headlines. Marc's absence now creates the cruelest technical trap Ducati could face. If he comes back better and immediately lifts the GP26, Ducati learns the bike was alive but needed the only rider violent enough to extract it. That still damns them, because a factory machine that requires Marc Márquez at full nerve function to look consistent is not a championship platform. It is a hostage situation with fairings. If he comes back and finds the same front-end problems, the same inconsistency, the same unreadable rhythm, then Ducati has wasted half a season waiting for the wrong answer. Either result hurts. One proves dependency, the other proves denial. Pecco does not escape this. He cannot. Pole at Le Mans and 3 straight sprint podiums should have been evidence that the old Bagnaia had found the doorway back. Instead, he crashed from second in the Grand Prix while Martin and Augura were coming like Aprilia had released debt collectors on slick tires. 85 points down is not a slump. It is the defending factory structure watching a 2-time champion lose relevance inside a season where his teammate is broken and still more central to Ducati's survival than he is. Pecco has results now. He does not have authority. That is the part that cuts. Alex Marquez does not escape either. Jerez gave him control, victory, and back-to-back home race weight. Then the surrounding races made that win look less like a takeover and more like a perfect strike inside a narrow window. Alex Rose hit hard and still sits 73 points back. Gresini can celebrate the trophy. The championship table does not care. Di Giannantonio does not escape. He is Ducati's standings leader, fast enough to look dangerous, not close enough to change the weather. Fourth at Le Mans, 2 seconds off the podium, 43 behind Bezzecchi. That is the cleanest Ducati card on the table. It is still losing. The hardest truth is this. Marc Márquez spent 2025 making Ducati's problems survivable, and 2026 is showing what happens when the survivor becomes the problem Ducati cannot control. Not morally, not personally, but technically, strategically, brutally. His body was the missing variable, and Ducati built a season plan that still needed him to perform like the variable did not exist. He said he did not like crying in front of microphones. That pride protected the myth. It also protected Ducati from answering sooner. The foot fracture made the surgery public. The nerve damage made the season readable. The delay made the factory look complicit in its own confusion. So now the road is ugly. Barcelona without Marc, maybe Mugello with a question mark instead of a champion. Aprilia carrying Bezzecchi, Martin, and Augura as proof of system strength. Ducati chasing constructor survival while deciding whether to keep burning 2026 or shift its soul toward the 850cc future. Marc's return will not simply be a comeback. It will be a test case. If the repaired arm restores the monster, Ducati gets a weapon back too late. If it does not, the paddock gets the question nobody wants written with his name attached. If Marc Márquez needs his body to obey perfectly just to keep Ducati's empire alive, how long before even a superhuman stops paying the factory's bill? The GP24 doesn't cover MotoGP, we cover its wars. Subscribe and enlist.